Hello everyone, we're going to start soon. If you can all take your seats, please. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm going to ask you to take your seats, please. There are some seats in the middle here. Don't be shy. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to those of you who are here physically present. I think we're over 100 people here, and I think over 300 people online. So it promises to be a good event already. Before I start, I just want to say a quick thank you to the project SkyPower. You'll learn a bit more about it in a few moments, so don't worry. But thank you for your collaboration and all your support in organizing this event. Now, to kick us off, I wanted to start by saying why are we talking about e-SAF and why we're talking about e-SAF now. As you know, we have different terms for one thing. This is very Brussels bubble, common in the Brussels bubble. e-SAF, e-fuels, synthetic kerosene, synthetic fuels. But many names just to say one thing and represent one critical piece of the aviation decarbonization puzzle. Now, e-fuels, e-SAF, are a renewable fuel, so they are an important piece of the aviation's pathway to net zero. They're based on renewable hydrogen and sustainable sources of CO2. It presents, obviously, a great advantage from the environmental perspective, for the aviation decarbonization pathway, but it's also an industrial opportunity. And this is why today we're talking about e-SAF, because as you may know, in a few days, I think, maybe some of you have access to the Clean Industrial Deal already, but the European Commission is going to come out with its Clean Industrial Deal, following up on its Green Deal adopted by the previous mandate. Obviously, this is important because it's a plan to scale up clean technologies, and we hope that e-SAF can be part of that clean industrial deal. It presents, obviously, a great scalable industrial EU homegrown opportunity for the industry, and it also helps energy independence and reduce reliance on imports. Now, just to set the scene before we lift off for the afternoon, I just wanted to remind you of a few figures. There we go. Perfect. 600,000 tons of e-SAF by 2030. 1 million ton of e-SAF by 2032. These are the amounts that have been mandated to produce e-SAF through the RefuelEU mandate. In order to get there, we've mapped out ourselves, TNE, and with the project SkyPower as well, over 30 industrial-scale e-SAF projects currently in development in EEA. This is important because these projects have the potential of actually producing up to 3 million tons of e-SAF every year by 2030, which is key, obviously, to reach our targets, not only the RefuelEU targets, but also our decarbonization targets. Now, unfortunately, the last figure that you will see here is maybe more depressing. It's zero. Unfortunately, none of these industrial-scale e-SAF projects have reached final investment decision. And this is important. Why? In order to be able to get 3 million tons of production capacity by 2030 and each year after that, decisions need to be made now. This year, 2026 potentially, but it takes time to construct a project. It takes time to build a plant. It takes time to get to that production capacity. So this is why we're also here. We're also here to talk about why are we not getting final investment decisions. And in order to address some of these, I just wanted to remind some of the barriers that we're facing in terms of e-SAF deployment. High costs. Obviously, this is a capital-intensive industry. This is an industry that faces strong competition from the fossil fuel industry, but also the biofuels industry, and it does cost a lot of money. That ends up probably costing 5 to 10 times more than the fossil jet alternative. The other issue that some of these players face is offtake uncertainty. Unfortunately, there are very few long-term offtake agreements between airlines and even fuel suppliers and e-SAF developers, One of the main reasons is because the aviation industry is used to short-term offtake contracts. Only 3 European airline groups actually have offtake agreements with e-SAF providers, and that actually represents 15% of the total SAF committed for the moment between airlines and SAF suppliers. All of this have been mapped out by our SAF observatory that you can find online. And final point, obviously, there are questions around the certainty of some of the regulations, some of the mandates, and also some potential funding gaps and lack of incentive to address those. Okay, I've set a bit of the scene. I think one of the main questions that we're going to try and address today is what can we do to address these challenges, and also what opportunity is there for Europe to actually deploy this industry. Now, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers and panelists today who will unpack, obviously, all these challenges. I encourage, obviously, all of you to actively engage, so online and here present also with us. You can scan the QR code now, but also later on in the panel discussions. I invite you to obviously submit your questions and comments. Obviously, this is why we're all here. So in order to launch us, who I would like to invite to the stage, so the Transport Commissioner is on his way, but we have the pleasure of also having Monsieur Calfon, Honourable Member of the Parliament, François Calfon, who's a member of the Transport Committee, and he obviously has also a keen interest in cleaning up aviation and shipping as well, and how to decarbonize sector. So, Monsieur Calfon, sorry, Falcon, that's also a lapsus. Yeah, exactly, lapsus révélateur. So, yeah, we're honored to have you here, and please, the floor is yours.
So hello, first I would congratulate Transport and Environment for organizing this event, and of course thank our Commissioner, Tsitsi Kostas, who will arrive in a few minutes. For 5 years, the European Union has a clear objective to reduce its greenhouse gas emission by 55% by 2030 compared at the 1990 levels, and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. The transport sector is the only major economic sector whose carbon emissions are higher than those of 1990. With the increase of technology efficiency and better utilization of airplane capacity, greenhouse gas emissions per passenger in the aviation sector have been divided by 2 since 1990. At the same time, total emissions from the aviation sector have doubled because of the traffic increase. In this context, it is clear why it is essential to decarbonize aviation fuels. This must be achieved through alternative fuels, and neither hydrogen aircraft nor electric aircraft are mature technologies, even in the medium term for mass transportation. In this regard, Refuel EU aviation legislation sets a clear target. By 2030, 6% of aviation fuel available in Europe must be sustainable fuels. This will increase to 34% by the 2040 and 70% by the 2050. Today, the production of sustainable aviation fuels in Europe relies on used cooking oils. For example, in my country, Total Energy and Air France-KLM announced last September an increase in their partnership to supply SAF, aiming to reach 1.5 million tons derived from used cooking oil by the 2035. In reality, there is currently no alternative. It should point out that today, airlines are purchasing SAF derived from used cooking oil and to 1,000 euros per ton, while kerosene costs only 800 euros per ton. This type of SAF allows for a 65% reduction in CO2 emissions over the product's life cycles. It will be an essential first step in meeting the initial Refuel EU aviation targets, particularly the 2030 target. However, the availability of feedstock will become an issue. Another possibility would be to use biomass derived from municipal waste or forestry waste. This solution has the advantage of providing more feedstock, particularly in the countries with significant forest resources. However, it will compete with uses from home heating or electricity production. This is why only 3 projects based on this technology have been implemented in Europe. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency estimates that European production of SAF from used oil or biomass will not exceed 4.4 million tons. However, by 2040, we will need 15 million tons of SAF, increasing to 32 million tons by 2050. So to achieve the decarbonization and meet the 2050 targets of Refuel EU Aviation, the aviation sector will need to rely on the development of an industrial e-kerosene sector. These synthetic fuels offer numerous advantages: a reduction CO2 emissions of around 85%, a reduction of nitrogen oxide emission by approximately 30%. They are compatible with the existing airport infrastructures. The quantity of e-kerosene produced is only limited by the amount of low-carbon energy available. However, it is not a miracle solution. Despite the numerous projects announced, there is currently no viable industrial sector. At present, their production cost is around 7,500 euros per ton, 10 times more than the traditional kerosene. According to estimates to meet the quotas set by Refuel EU Aviation, the production of e-kerosene will consume as much electricity in the 2050 as today's. Hello, Mr. Commissioner, Germany total electricity demand. Bonjour, bonjour. Nevertheless, in the only technological solution, we must support it as much as necessary. Support that for the development of e-kerosene must first come from all players in the aviation sector. Airports, airlines, and aircraft manufacturers all need to get involved. Copenhagen is a good example. The airport authorities, in collaboration with Scandinavian Airlines and the energy company Ørsted, have announced their cooperation to create e-kerosene plants. It will replace 5% of the traditional kerosene offered by the airport by 2027 and the 30% by 2030. This synergy is a step in the right direction. It is the kind of initiative that we need to support. Also, at the moment, only a maximum of 50% of e-kerosene mixed with conventional kerosene is allowed in aircraft fuels. The certification body must certify the use of more than 50% in engines as soon as possible. Oil companies have also a fundamental role to play. At present, they are mobilizing funds almost exclusively for the production of sustainable aviation fuels from used oil. The only oil company that had announced it was developing an industrial project to produce e-kerosene is Shell in Sweden, who announced in July 2024 that it was withdrawing from the project. At the present, only startups are working on the 56 e-kerosene development projects in Europe. Also, the oil companies have sufficient funds at their disposal. It will be necessary to introduce regulation, as we have done for the automotive sector in the context of decarbonization. Why not make it compulsory for oil companies to invest or produce alternative fuel and e-kerosene? Finally, of course, the European Union must also do its part. The reimbursement of the price difference between SAFs and the traditional fuels, thanks for the free distribution of ETS quotas until 2030 is a good start. The press has also reported on the state aid framework of the Clean Industrial Deal. It is not yet official, but member states could provide financial support for the development of SAF, including e-fuels. This is an important step in the development of the industrial sector. Other measures need to be put in place. Increased financial support through InvestEU for companies working to set up e-kerosene industry. Setting contracts for difference based on the model already in place for energy. The idea is to ensure a fixed purchase price for e-kerosene with an EU subsidy mechanism if it is the market price is higher than the contract price. And partial reimbursement of producers if the market price is lower than the contract price. Finally, even if it is only 2% of the air traffic, corporate aviation needs to make an effort. We will support a stricter timetable for implementing decarbonization with a higher proportion of SAF required than in commercial aviation. I'm sure we can achieve this if all players in this room, but outside of this room, in the sector work together and be focused on it guilt-free way. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Calfon, for those very important points. To continue on the cruising of this flight through this event, we have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Apostolos Tzitzikostas, first ever Transport and Tourism Commissioner with Sustainable in his title. We're very honored, and it's a big pleasure to welcome you to share with us a bit more of your insights in how the Clean Industrial Deal is gearing up and how aviation can also play a part in that. Mr. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
After Mr. Calfon, there is not much to say. Hein? Je crois que tu as couru tout. Hein? You should know that he's one of the most active members of the European Parliament, and I really like the way he works. He's a doer. So, bravo, François. So, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, first of all, for your invitation to be here today. I'm really glad to be here, as you said rightfully, as the first commissioner who has sustainable in his title, which is for me a great honor, but it's also a great responsibility. And I know very well that it is by coming together at events such this one that we will put Europe in the best possible position for today's sustainable race. A race to protect our planet and to deploy the technologies that will shape how we move around for the decades to come. To begin with, aviation is very much part of this sustainability race. It faces not only environmental pressures, but also the growing demand for a more reliable and sustainable energy supply. We've all seen, the consequences of unchecked dependencies on fossil fuels. We need to end this geopolitical vulnerability. We need to break free from these dependencies and create a more stable and secure future for Europe. And as we do that, our competitiveness depends on achieving low and stable energy prices for all citizens, including for sustainable aviation fuels. Now, the Clean Industrial Deal, due later this month, will set the stage for a robust and competitive, sustainable European industry. And it will pave the way for a sustainable transport investment plan that we are preparing currently. Because investment, my dear friends, is what we desperately need today to accelerate the use of cleaner fuels. We have the Refuel EU Aviation, the Fuel EU Maritime Regulations, the Renewable Energy and Energy Taxation Directives, and of course, the ETS. These create a framework to stimulate the uptake of renewable and low-carbon fuels. There's no question about that. But the regulatory framework is not stimulating market investment at a level that we want, nor at a level that we need today. So at present, these fuels are limited in availability. And this is the problem, partly due, of course, to market uncertainty. So I understand that the financial outlook indeed remains challenging, with price volatility and revenue uncertainties for early adopters. The Draghi report estimates the cost of decarbonizing European aviation at approximately 60 billion euros per year. The EU and the member state budget simply cannot fund this sum. So we need to leverage both public and private investment. Now, we are still working on the content of the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan, but this is what it's going to be about: a mechanism of how to bring together private and public investments for refuels. Now, for me, it is very clear, ladies and gentlemen, that it should include both short and medium-term measures to better encourage support for the specific renewable and the low-carbon fuels that aviation and waterborne transport need, because we should not forget the maritime sector. These could include actions to prioritize fuel projects under existing programs, such as Horizon Europe, Innovation Fund, InvestEU, and it could involve the European Investment Bank, the EIB as well, and other financial institutions to become more involved, mitigating risks for the private investors. Now, to support the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan, this year we will make available additional 570 million euros under the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Facility, the AFIF, for the rollout of alternative fuels for road, maritime, inland waterways, and air transport. Also, another tool, the Hydrogen Bank, financed through the Innovation Fund, is already supporting the rollout of maritime fuel projects with 200 million euros. And we will investigate how we can make even better use of this financial stream. And in the longer term, we will look at de-risking private investment in large-scale production facilities. We will also look at new mechanisms to reduce the price gap for domestically produced synthetic fuels, and at a revenue guarantee, again, for first movers. We need, my dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, to make bold investments today to take advantage of this opportunity tomorrow. And we have no time to waste. If we act wisely now, Europe can lead globally in sustainability and gain a competitive edge. Equally important is to make more of the talent that we have here in Europe. Innovation and smart specialization are key drivers of growth and competitiveness. And with more innovation, You know it very well. We can capitalize on our strong position in clean and smart production technologies by promoting, for example, new aircraft types, deploying innovative solutions, and modernizing our aviation infrastructure. We can reduce the SAF price gap and make our industry more climate resilient. Now, of course, I know it. It is true that we will always need to import some of our energy. And this is why the STIP, Sustainable Transport Investment Plan, will promote international cooperation projects as well. Using what? Another very important tool of the European Commission, the Global Gateway. And we will make renewable and low-carbon transport fuels a key part of a clean trade and investment partnerships with third countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I briefly gave you, or tried to do so, an overview of the key pillars of our plan as we face both the climate crisis and the increased global competition. It is a plan that does not take competitiveness of our aviation industry for granted. And I have to underline that. We need to fight. But it is a plan that confirms our obvious target. We want to win the race of sustainability. And we will win it. Against time, and sometimes against our own selves. It is also a plan to reaffirm Europe's place in the world as an attractive, stable, and reliable trading and investment partner. And we always need to keep in our minds that regional and cohesive growth and productivity, that competitiveness are the backbone of our internal market and our economy. So this is our plan. This is our vision. But I know that visions and plans don't become a reality overnight, nor in a few years. They have to be worked at, and we have to work for them together, consistently. And if we do that, if we work together consistently, aviation by 2029 will be on a secure track to reaching net zero by 2050. But this is the only way. Aviation is already a great success for Europe. It is one of the biggest success stories. And I assure you that we have all the tools we need to continue this journey and to protect, preserve, and strengthen both our union and our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I think you speak a lot of the language that a number of people in this room will appreciate. I think winning the race of sustainability is clearly something I will remember and use myself. But no, very important things that I hope we can delve into in the panel session. But before cruising through that panel, I would like to invite Trishla and Amelia that will tell us more about the Sky Power project. Basically, a big bunch of CEOs, very eager CEOs to try and see the e-SAF value chain grow, came together into this project Sky Power. So if I can pass the floor to Trishla and Amelia, I can't remember, perfect. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be up here today in front of you all presenting Sky Power's open letter, which was just published this morning on behalf of over 70 organizations from across the e-SAF ecosystem, many of which are represented here today, which is great to see. As a brief introduction, I myself am the project manager from the Secretariat on the systemic side. We work together with two other organizations to lead the Sky Power Secretariat. That's the Green Finance Institute and the Mission Possible Partnership. And in a few minutes, we'll hear from Amelia, who is part of the Green Finance Institute. So the letter published this morning was detailing the 5 critical policy interventions to accelerate the scale-up of e-SAF in the EU. Before I go into the critical asks, I'll first provide a bit of context building on what we heard from Joe earlier. So, we need the first final investment decisions in these projects to take place at the end of this year. Why is that? Well, if we work backwards from 2030, which is when we have the first e-SAF mandates under the Refuel EU Aviation starting, we know that these projects take around 4 years for construction, commissioning, and ramp-up. This leaves us with less than 12 months to get the first large-scale projects to FID. Refuel EU Aviation was a critical turning point. It provided a very necessary demand signal, without which we wouldn't be here in this room having this conversation today. However, any delays in the final investment decisions will have equal delays in the start of operations, and this will not only put the sub-mandates at risk, but also the longer-term emissions reduction trajectory of the aviation industry. This is why this conversation and this event today is so urgent. That window for meaningful action is rapidly closing. In terms of where we are with regards to meeting our targets, well, we heard from Joe earlier, we have over 30 e-SAF projects announced across the EU. This totals to around over 2 million tons of e-SAF capacity that's been announced. But the bottom line is we're not on track. So the announced capacity far exceeds what we need by 2030 to actually reach the targets, which is around 600,000 tons. But the reality is the majority of projects remain in feasibility and pre-feasibility stages, with years in between them and a potential final investment decision. As I said, Refuel EU was a critical turning point, but any delays will cause the whole kind of trajectory of the aviation industry to be set off track. And so when we looked at the landscape, and this chart here shows the estimated e-SAF capacity by likelihood of coming online by 2030, we saw only around 5 e-SAF projects, around half of the volumes that we need by 2030, that are on track to actually getting operational by then. When we speak to a lot of the e-SAF producers, it becomes very clear that all projects, even the most advanced ones, face a common set of barriers. And this is how Project Sky Power came to be. Recognizing that these projects were facing barriers that no single player could overcome on its own, Project Sky Power brings the whole e-SAF ecosystem together to drive towards a collective vision, which is to make e-SAF a commercial reality this decade to pave the way for the first large-scale e-SAF plants to reach FID by the end of this year. So why e-SAF? The opportunity is threefold, really, and building on what we've just heard. So e-SAF really offers the opportunity to strengthen domestic industry, improve energy security, spur renewed investment into the chemicals and fuels sectors, and to really strengthen the resilience of our domestic aviation fuel supply chains. It also offers the opportunity to position Europe as a global leader in this critical technology. We heard earlier that the EU may not be, the major exporter for e-SAF in the long term, but by being a first mover, the EU can position itself as a leader in e-SAF technology and a future global exporter of that technology, that IP, those services. The third opportunity is to really advance climate targets in a sector which accounts for over 2.5% of global emissions. Europe is truly the epicenter of e-SAF activity. We've seen that. And it's really in a great position to have a head start with this industry. Refuel EU was of course, an amazing starting point, and we can't rely on policy alone. We need equally bold ambition from industry. However, given the critical barriers that are faced, without strategic additional policy support, it won't be possible to get to the mandates fast enough. And so Project Sky Power, together with its members, have identified the 5 critical policy interventions that we believe are needed to accelerate the scale-up of e-SAF. I'll go through each one in detail in a second, but just going through the full list, the first one is to make e-SAF a strategic priority, both in the Clean Industrial Deal and the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan. The second is to recycle ETS revenues from aviation to capitalise a market intermediary. This intermediary would enter into long-term offtake contracts on the producer side to provide the revenue certainty that these projects need, and it would enter into short-term sales agreements on the demand side in order to help off-takers manage price risk. The third ask is to establish a bridging mechanism this year in order to provide immediate support and enable first movers to act. The fourth one is to provide long-term certainty over the regulatory landscape, particularly around the mandates post the 2027 review, the production criteria, and the penalties. And finally, to mitigate project-on-project risk for first-of-a-kind projects via a backstop mechanism provided by the government. So, over 70 organisations, as I mentioned, put their voice behind these 5 asks towards the Commission. You can see them on the screen today, and it's really amazing to see all these stakeholders from such different starting points coming towards common ground. It's really a testament to the readiness of industry to act and collectively work together towards a shared goal. I'll now deep dive into the first 2 interventions before I hand over to Emilia to go through the remaining 3. So, the Clean Industrial Deal and the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan are critical short-term opportunities to recognise the importance of e-SAF as a strategic priority to the EU. In particular, the Clean Industrial Deal and recognition of e-SAF within it as a strategic priority would help to accelerate the mobilisation of capital and position and secure the EU's position as a leader in this critical technology on a global stage. The Sustainable Transport Investment Plan is, on the other hand, is an opportunity to develop a more granular investment roadmap for e-SAF and achieving the Refuel EU aviation sub-mandates to provide confidence to the sector that there is a plan in place and that these mandates are achievable. This is a great opportunity to really identify the most effective and efficient funding instruments for e-SAF. And this brings us to the next 4 interventions. So the second one is to establish a market intermediary that solves 2 problems that are currently not addressed by the existing instruments that are available at the EU level for e-SAF projects. So the first challenge is the need for revenue certainty. In order for any of these e-SAF projects to reach final investment decision, they need to secure a certainty of revenues over the entire loan period, and they need to do this from credit-worthy off-takers. And so a way to solve for this is that the market intermediary would enter into long-term offtake contracts with e-SAF producers, and that market intermediary would be government-backed in order to provide that creditworthiness. The second challenge is that e-SAF off-takers, or aircraft operators, suppliers, etc., need to be able to manage the price risk, especially because of this perception that future production of e-SAF will have lower cost of production, and therefore locking into high prices puts off-takers at risk. And so to solve for this, the market intermediary would simultaneously enter into short-term off-take agreements with, or sales agreements with potential off-takers. Now, this isn't a new model. This is a model that has been rigorously designed and tested by H2 Global, and they have put it into practice with initial supply-side auctions, pilot supply-side auctions, that for e-ammonia have found a winning bid. They've also gone through this process with e-methanol, and unfortunately, the e-SAF, the initial pilot auctions for e-SAF were unsuccessful. But the bottom line is there is a strong foundation on which we can build on. And this market intermediary is not only to mitigate risks through asymmetrical contract durations, but it also can be a way to secure the competitiveness of European e-SAF production and European aviation. By recycling ETS revenues from the aviation sector back into the intermediary, you can increase the competitiveness of both European-based production and aviation by lowering the price of e-SAF to provide a level playing field. And this is particularly pertinent for as regions start to ramp up their production, and particularly other regions which have potentially access to lower cost feedstocks like lower cost renewable electricity and potentially government subsidies. On that note, I'll hand over to Emilia to walk us through the remaining 3 interventions.
Great. Thank you, Trishla. So moving on to the next slide. Ask 3 for a bridging mechanism to bridge the gap between now and when a market intermediary would come online, which could be expected to be between 1 and 2 years. Why do we need a bridging mechanism? Well, if you have a market intermediary such as the H2 global model, which is an incredibly efficient and effective use of government capital, a use of public support, then it's likely that we will see a pause in offtakes being struck between now and that intermediary coming into effect. As Trishla alluded to at the beginning of her presentation, we need revenue certainty now to get these plants past FID over the next 12 months to meet the mandates by 2030, and therefore we're proposing the idea of a bridging mechanism to come into place to bridge that gap, to say that offtakes that are struck that meet specific requirements are eligible for priority access to a market intermediary when that comes online. This is expected to remove that first mover disadvantage and help get plants past FID. Moving on to Ask 4, which is around market uncertainty. So as you're all aware, there is a significant amount of market uncertainty which inhibits investment flowing into sustainable e-SAF plants. We split this into 3 key categories, the first of which is around the mandates being upheld. Again, as you're all aware, we have the review of Refuel EU Aviation that is set to take place in 2027. This is a mandatory part of European regulation, and I highlight to you, again, as I'm sure you know, that the Commission is required to review and not necessarily revise the regulation. However, that does not necessarily reduce the market uncertainty around this topic. What we need in this space is clear outline of the different potential outcomes that could come out of that discussion to really give the market some clarity on the different scenarios that could happen to encourage investment. The second point here is around the penalty mechanisms. So we had a deadline at the end of last year to receive guidance from member states around what these penalty mechanisms would look like. None of the member states provided the guidance in line with that target. The problem with that is that the liability cannot be clearly assessed or accounted for on companies' balance sheets, which means that it is struggled in some ways to be taken seriously. To receive this guidance from member states, again, would be key for encouraging investment. And also, we need to have this harmonised across the member states to reduce market distortion and to have ease of implementation. Finally, moving on to point 3, we need to make sure that the rules around e-SAF production for e-SAF produced today remain intact for the full life cycle of a project. So the e-SAF, for an e-SAF project that is put into place now, there's not the risk that that e-SAF will not be valid, will not be eligible under Refuel EU in years to come. Therefore, we're proposing the idea of having grandfathering principles to make sure that this is the case. Moving on to Ask 5 on project risk. So as you know, the key feedstocks that feed into e-SAF production, renewable electricity and carbon dioxide, suffer their own project delivery risks, which are outside of the control of an e-SAF producer. This is something that financiers struggle to get comfortable with. For example, renewable energy, under the strict rules of Refuel EU, often this energy is required to be additional, meaning that its own renewable energy facility is required to be developed. That facility needs to come online and deliver that electricity in line with an e-SAF plant going live, again, posing a significant delivery risk. From a carbon dioxide perspective, again, carbon capture, is a complex, relatively new technological process. We also need the implementation of the infrastructure to transport that carbon dioxide from the point of source to the delivery to the point of production of e-SAF, again proposing a significant risk. What we are proposing here as a potential mitigation method is a financial backstop that would cover any fixed costs, so whether that is to service the debt or fixed operating costs, to make sure that a project is able to service these costs at the point of any delay. This could vary in terms of the length of the delay, which would be for a fixed time period with a maximum liability, but this would give financiers comfort that these costs would be covered in a worst-case scenario. We appreciate that these asks are not straightforward, but we have done a lot of research and a lot of engagement with industry to really pull this together and tell you what needs to happen. And I think this really sets the stage for the panel discussion that we're about to have now. So I'll pass it back over to you, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Trishla. Thank you, Amelia. I know that, Mr. Commissioner, you might need to slip off. Can I ask for a quick picture with our panelists and inviting our panelists on stage? Monsieur Calfon, if you don't mind just having a quick picture. Apologies for those of you online. A quick picture with the panelists, and then we'll start our panel. Yeah, please, maybe, yeah. Please. François au milieu. Allez-y. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Calfon. Thank you so much. Right. Well, actually, the panelists can stay and present themselves here. Yes, please go ahead. No, please sit where you want. I'll just sit here. Perfect. Diversity. Exactly. Right, great. So here we are for our last cruising phase of this event. As you can see, I enjoy aviation metaphors. I hope I'm speaking to a crowd that enjoys them. So I'm gathered here with a set of extremely important panelists and experts in their fields, starting with Alexander Kirst, who is Deputy Head of the Brussels office for BP, Senior Manager for External Affairs, so representing obviously the fuel supplier angle and producer. Yeah. Next to him, Rania Yorgutsaku. Perfect, I'm practicing my Greek. Managing Director for Airlines for Europe, which obviously represents over 17 airline groups and 80% of European air traffic. Next to her is Erwin Nederkorn, so Managing Director, Global Lead for Energy, Hydrocarbons and New Energies for ING, so important financial hat in this panel. And then Catherine Estes, Commercial Vice President for Arcadia E-Fuels. Catherine joined Arcadia E-Fuel 2 years ago with over 20 years of experience in specialty chemicals and bringing new products to market, so definitely expertise that's needed in this field. And last but not least, Eddy Liégeois, Head of Unit for Aviation Policy in DG Move from the European Commission. Now, I wanted to start off this panel to give participants a bit of a state of play of where all of you are at when it comes to e-SAF, and maybe I'll start with Catherine from Arcadia. You should have each your own microphones. I think we're missing one microphone. Yeah. So, Catherine, could you tell us a bit about how Arcadia e-Fuels projects are developing? Maybe, any updates from your side, and maybe, bouncing back on what you just heard from Trishla and Amelia. Anything you recognize from some of the things that have been talked about just now?
Excellent. So good afternoon. Everyone can hear me okay? Good. So it's a pleasure to be here and represent the team's work at Arcadia eFuels, because it is certainly a team effort to bring future fuels to market. Our flagship project is in southeast Denmark. It will produce 70 KT of e-SAF annually, and that is because we're focusing on bringing e-kerosene or e-SAF to scale as quickly as possible. We also, in addition to that Denmark project, we're also developing a project in the UK, where we've been a recipient of the Advanced Fuel Fund Award, round 2 last year, and advancing that project nicely. And additionally, we also have a project we're developing in the US. So really looking to leverage the learnings and innovation that we started in Denmark, that we founded in Denmark, and take that and replicate it, just like you heard earlier from Tricia, expanding that technology and innovation that's coming from Europe, and leveraging that around the world. So we do that and we focus on that because we know that this is a sensitivity, there's a sensitivity on cost, and we want to drive cost down. Where we are in progress for our flagship project is we have completed the front-end engineering design of that project in summer of last year already. So that puts us, fortunately or unfortunately, in the front position of some of these pain points that you've heard today, right? So to put it in perspective for these e-SAF projects of scale to come to market, you're looking at, just for development fees, just to get through the front-end engineering design, is 40 to 70 million euros for every single project, right? So this is an investment that it's already been made, already capital deployed by Arcadia, specifically for our Denmark project. And now we are waiting on that last piece, and that is certainty around offtake. So we can unpack some of the positions around offtake and what you're struggling, but you know, a lot of what we've heard has been mentioned today. Our off-takers need assistance with risk. They're leaning in. There are first movers on wanting to decarbonize with e-SAF, putting it into their mix. There are definitely strategic players. We see interest in that, but we see them really struggle with doing that while also remaining competitive. And that's really what we're looking to broaden in the conversation today.
Thank you, Catherine. And you mentioned offtake and off-takers, and maybe I can pass over to you, maybe Rania, maybe share experience from an off-taker perspective. Maybe have your airlines and members had any experience in trying to procure e-SAF? What challenges have they faced?
Absolutely. So there are airlines who are trying to engage and actually take part of the risk in this investment for SAF and e-SAF in particular. And the kind of feedback I hear is fundamentally one of how much risk can you take? We are different animals. I mean, already we're different animals. Airlines fly planes and people safely from point A to point B, already engaged with a multitude of stakeholders, and going into the details of SAF or e-SAF production was not part of the paycheck in the beginning. So it's a whole new world that people are investing in. And I see CEOs asking each other, do you have a good SAF expert to advise on? I mean, it's complicated. And then fundamentally the risk is such that we have to reconsider how we do things. So you need 5 or 6 offtake agreements, right, to at least guarantee, let's say, 50% of your production is what I hear from my members. An offtake agreement has to be around 10 years for you. In my world, normally you do 2 to 3 years offtake agreements, because that's what we used to do with traditional fuel, and why would we change? We've never worked together, at least not on this project, which is so capital intensive that actually no one's done the maths before, because it's a whole new market, which is just emerging. So how much of the risk do we share? How much is the actual right price to put in the contract? I open my books, you open your books. That's a lot of trust building up between 2 companies which operate in a very competitive environment, each of them, and which need to get to know each other, trust each other, and enter a long-term relationship. You know, it's normally you date a few times and then you get married, and this one is a bit more fast track, if I can put that comparison, building on a discussion I had this morning, sorry. So those kinds of practicalities means that psychologically already we come from very, very different worlds and very different practices, and the amount of money that is involved is, I guess, in a way frightening to everybody, because in the same way that you have to guarantee your costs and your production, my member airlines also have shareholders who need to understand, why is it that we pay so much more? Why is it that we rely on these new people? Why is it that we need to change the way we do business today? And who underwrites that risk for the airline as well?
And maybe talking about risk and money, I'm looking to Erwin. Can you tell us a bit about why you're interested in e-SAF? Maybe share a few of your experience in trying to look into the e-SAF world now.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I wish I was sitting here and bragging about the projects we have supported already, but unfortunately, I can't. And I think
why? And why is that?
And the reasons, I think, were very well explained by Trishla and Emilia on Project Skypower. But we, as kind of ING, we have sustainability indeed high on our agenda. But I think I've never come across in my 25-year energy banker career where there is kind of a market. There is a lot of kind of capital, human capital, as well as monetary capital put into something, but zero FID. So definitely something is wrong, something is missing. And I think what is also kind of explained by Project Skypower is that there is kind of a role for the public sector to play, because apparently this is something that the private sector cannot solve by themselves, very clearly. I think this is kind of a testament of the situation we are in on e-SAF. So I really kind of was glad that Project Skypower basically assembled the whole value chain, and to come up with really kind of practical components which basically translate the ambition on the one side to kind of what are feasible, bankable projects on the other side. And I think it's in the end very simple, right? So the private sector, they also have a mandate. They have a mandate from, shareholders, stakeholders. And you can expect from a private company to accept a lower return for something, but you cannot kind of expect that companies invest in zero, even negative kind of returns. That is simply not kind of how the private sector works. So therefore, the public sector need to step in and to kind of regulate in such a way that indeed alternatives become, the fossil alternative become more expensive, and the sustainable one becomes cheaper. And I think here the role is actually to kind of, in the end, the polluter pays, to kind of, have that money, because I think the polluter is willing to pay and can pay, to basically have those monies kind of being, basically being transferred in the end to kind of the producers. And I think that is exactly the role that the public sector needs to pick up through, for example, the instruments as proposed.
Maybe before going into the public, let's say, institutional importance in incentivizing the e-SAF, could you share what would make an e-SAF project bankable? You mentioned, what is it that makes an e-SAF project bankable? Maybe it's difficult to just say one thing.
But I think it was very well summarized already, right? So you have to find somebody who is paying the bill, right? Who's willing to pay the premium. So you need to kind of, just look at the cash flows. That needs to be positive if you add everything up. And then kind of, so that's the fundament. And then obviously with these kind of complex projects, you need to look, let's say, at the risk profiles and so on. So it comes also, with the parties who actually develop these projects, and also on the what we have kind of indicated here, the project-on-project risk, which is also something which is a very important component in order to unlock these kind of projects. So I think it basically boils down to those two kind of basic fundamental topics in order to make things over these projects bankable.
So reducing the risk and reducing the premium, basically the upfront premium of some of these projects. So moving maybe to what role, as you just suggested, EU institutions and maybe member states can play. I wanted to come back to the mandate, because obviously, and this was repeated by Trishla and Emilia, the RefuelEU mandate was a great signal. We have over 30 plus projects that have started thanks to that signal. I'm turning to you, Alex, from BP's perspective. How are you preparing for that mandate? How is, the e-SAF mandate is coming into play this year. So how is BP preparing for that?
Thanks very much. I think at BP we've got experience of supplying aviation fuel in around 20 European member states. We've supplied so far sustainable aviation fuels to more than 40 airports. And what we're seeing, and let's start maybe with the e-SAF mandate that we've seen come into place and take effect from the beginning of this year, we're seeing a very well supplied market. Of course, it's not a surprise given today's discussions that the outlook for the e-SAF mandate when that comes into place in 2030 is, of course, a very different story. And I think we cannot underestimate and understate the cost of that involved. And let me just repeat some of the numbers that we saw here. And we're talking about a 5 to 10 times multiple compared to fossil jet fuel. And that's huge. And maybe to compare that with a different figure, carbon abatement cost. In carbon abatement cost terms, we are talking about roughly a $2,000 per ton of CO2 carbon abatement cost. So I think when we talk about the cost needs to come down, that's a massive, massive mountain to climb. Couple of things that can be done to tackle the cost, and one of the things that we'd like to see more discussion on is integration of green hydrogen into biofuel production routes. I know when people talk about e-SAF, there are preconceived concepts and people think, okay, well, e-SAF is one thing and b-SAF is a different thing. We see lots of synergies with HEFA production, with co-processing. Indeed, you need huge amounts of green hydrogen. So one of the things we'd like to see is to start creating these incentives to integrate and provide an incentive for green hydrogen into bio-SAF production. Because frankly, it's hard to see how e-SAF projects, with all the challenges that we have seen, can come to fruition if we cannot even take the first step of creating an incentive for green hydrogen into biofuel production. Second point, we need to talk about refuel penalties. We have an open-ended penalty due to the resupply obligation, so we're talking about 2 times the cost difference, 2 times of a huge cost difference at least, plus a resupply obligation in subsequent years. When the market cannot supply in 1 year, it's hard to see how it can supply twice the volume in the next year and then go back to the kind of normal volumes once we've kind of caught up. So I think there's a bit of a question how the refuel mandate with the current open-ended liability system could work in practice. We're also seeing that with traditional road fuel mandates, and we've got lots of experience in many member states around road transport mandates. What has worked really well is a sufficiently high, very ambitious buyout price. So maybe this is something to look at in the context of refuel as well. And then lastly, financing, huge issue. There is huge technology risk. I think we shouldn't underestimate that. There is, despite the refuel mandates, we've got demand risk and financial risk. And I think this is this is one of the things that we need to get a bit more certainty and clarity on. And I appreciate all the work that Project Sky Power has done. I think that's an excellent starting point. So we need to see a bit more, a bit more of a pragmatic approach around financing.
Thank you, Alex. Maybe can I just follow up on that and ask you, about how transferable you think, your current infrastructure to supply fuel can be to adapt to an e-fuel or e-SAF in the future? Because I understand that you're talking about trying to incentivize the use of green hydrogen in order to maybe one day produce e-SAF. How confident are you that you can transfer that infrastructure into an e-SAF plant?
I think that's a great point. And if we start looking at how fossil jet fuel is produced, you've got existing refineries, existing kit that's paid for. Let's utilize that kit, because with minor upgrades, relatively minor upgrades, you can use the same production facilities and produce b-SAF, integrate green hydrogen. The process itself needs green hydrogen when you're making bio-SAF. And it's agnostic to whether that green hydrogen is of fossil origin or of green or green. So in a way, it's kind of colorblind. So I think that on the production side, you're seeing kind of lots of similar processes that can be utilized regardless of the origin of the feedstock. And then when we look at the final product, we have to realize that we've got a very well-functioning existing commingled fuel system. We've got pipelines running across Europe, and we are talking about drop-in renewable fuels. So we need to utilize existing infrastructure.
I don't know, Catherine, if you want to jump back. Otherwise, I'll go to Eddie. But
yeah, so I think one of the things that I would add to the conversation is certainly Refuel EU Aviation is a landmark regulation, right? It has really sent such a strong demand signal globally for SAF. And that has helped where both the mandatory market and regulatory market, or our voluntary market, want to participate. So that's all very positive. But if we zoom out on what the market needs to meet 2050 goals, it is beyond what the feedstocks are beyond what can just be accomplished with the bio-SAF, right? And so what I'm highlighting here is that the case for a CO2-based or an e-SAF product is that in order to get to our carbon abatement goals for aviation by 2050, it is multiple feedstock technologies that are going to get us there, right? It is the bio-SAF. It is a CO2-based. It is a waste-based, whatever form that waste comes in, right? And so there are multiple technology waves that are going to continue to need to innovate, as well as carbon capture and buying credits, right? So all of these are, when you talk to the aviation sector, you will hear that they are looking at a hybrid approach for all of these ways to abate emissions. So, I very much take Alex's point that, hey, maybe this is something else we should do to decarbonize. All technology should be part of the conversation, absolutely. But we need to start early thinking about these feedstocks, and that's why we're focused on that future fuel.
Maybe, Eddie, bringing you into the conversation because the mandate was also mentioned by Catherine. How, we hear sometimes a bit of, gossip or, different views on how certain the mandate can be, especially in the 2027 review. Could you maybe share with us a bit of what the Commission can do to kind of reassure where it's heading, especially when it comes to e-SAF trajectories?
Perhaps as I'm just new, I must say in the business, I am head of unit of aviation policy since 1st of January. So I would like to have a sense of optimism because there's a lot of difficulties here around the table. Since January, I've seen, for example, the Destination 2050 initiative, which I find very positive. I see there the aviation industry, airlines, airports, also manufacturers really behind the objective of greening aviation because there is no choice. You will pay either the ETS or you will decarbonize. So I see that something very positive there, and the mandate is there, but we will also need a commitment from the fuel supplier. And I hear what you said about the penalties, but indeed the mandate is there. A second positive point is the fact that we have met the 2025 target. It's true that the very first, it's b-SAF, but still it's there, and I would say there is no problem to meet the 2030 deadline again for b-SAF. But we all agree, based on what the previous speaker said, that we have indeed a challenge on e-SAF. And there, the mandate is very clear, because as we have said, it will be impossible to find a feedstock to continue the current trend to decarbonize the different sectors of the economy, including aviation with just biofuels and advanced biofuels. So we definitely need e-SAF, and the presentation just before was clear on the need to have the decision taken basically in 1 year or 18 months. I think we all agree on the I would say on the issue that is in front of us. That's a matter of cost for the installations, for the fuel supplier, and also the cost of the entrant, hydrogen, and the challenge for the airlines to cope, I would say, for this investment. And we have to make sure that EU aviation remains competitiveness worldwide. So there, I think that we all agree, and we, Commission, we agree that there is what I would call a market failure. I would say basically a need for a public intervention. And then I come to your question about the mandate, which in fact has just entered into force. I would say that it's very clear. The legislator, the co-legislator, has decided, the Council, the European Parliament. There are very clear targets that have to be met every 5 years. And I would say that today, early 2025, I see no reason why we should depart from what has been decided, I would say, just a few months ago. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that in 1 year or in 2 years, when we will have to make this review or possibly the revision of the mandate, I do not see any reason which would come on the table, mm-hmm. which would, I would say, indicate that we have made a wrong choice when adopting the refueling aviation. We see that the targets are, let's say, reasonable, ambitious, but reasonable as far as e-SAF. And I think that they are also very reasonable as far as e-SAF, but indeed, then it means that decisions have to be taken now. Mm-hmm. But there is absolutely no reason to postpone, because I don't see the reason why in 5 years we will be in a better position in terms of decision, in terms of investment for the development of e-fuels. So, to reply very clearly to your question, there will be a review on, let's say, the modalities, if we need to adapt, to refine the means how to achieve the target, but clearly the target should stay as they are. Mm-hmm. We sometimes criticize the European Union, the Commission, that we revise constantly legislation. For once, here we will keep the line, the path as clear as possible. Mm.
Thank you, Eddie. I see clapping in the room, maybe also clapping online virtually. Rania, you want to jump in? Yes.
I'd like to echo what you have said, Eddie, and thank you for that. I think now's the time to have a conversation about how we're going to make this happen. And for those of you who are maybe not familiar with the Destination 2050 roadmap, that's a roadmap that was set out by aviation, the industry itself, so airlines, myself and the regional airlines, the airports, the plane makers, and the ANSPs, the people who manage air traffic and the technology for that. We got together back in 2021 when we set out a roadmap of how we're going to get to net zero by 2050. And we did a review. We launched it a couple of weeks ago. So we demonstrate with this review that the recipe is still the same. We still need SAF. We still need better plane technology. We still need better traffic management systems. We still need economic measures such as ETS. But what has changed is the cost and the proportion. So SAF is now about 50% of the emissions reductions that we need in order to get to net zero. So it's really grown. And the premium cost, so the cost on top of the business as usual scenario, has also increased by 500 billion euros. The premium cost is now 1.3 trillion. And to be frank, I had to Google what a trillion is, and it's 12 zeros. As a Greek, you realize it's stupid money to me. So it's a lot of money, okay? And fundamentally, what airlines care about is accelerating the availability of affordable SAF. What the commissioner said earlier in very simple language, we need low and stable fuel prices. And what I care about as an airline is to get there as soon as possible. And that's important to me, not just as an airline, it's important to me as a Greek, because flying is one of the key ways of how we get around Europe and the world when you're far away from the center of wealth, of decision-making, of business. So what I care about, ultimately, what we care about in Destination 2050, and why you will see us today vocal, also this morning at the CESAR Joint Undertaking Initiative, and wherever we can, what we care about is accelerating the pace now, because as you say, investment decisions need to be made now, emission savings need to be done every year, because the more we wait, the more it becomes expensive, and the more we lose out on the net zero target. So that's where we come from, keeping flying accessible, and rolling out the plan.
Alex, you wanted to quickly jump in?
Yeah, Rania, I think what we're hearing from you and also from your members who are our customers is you care about price. So I think the conversation that we need to be having is the conversation around how can we make e-SAF more cost effective. We outlined a couple of options to do that. At the same time, and this goes to your point, Catherine, we very much agree with that. It's and. The conversation we also need to be having is what can we do around b-SAF? If we think there is scope to do more, if we think, okay, well, hold on, feedstocks appear to be limited, there are other feedstock categories that we need to look at, such as intermediate and cover crops. The Commission has revised the infamous red Annex 9 feedstock list last year. That's a good step in the right direction. There's a couple more things that need to be done around providing clarity on the certification rules. These are crucial details, and we'd like to be having these conversations and see these rules rather sooner than later, because that will then ultimately help the aviation sector achieve and support decarbonization at lower cost.
So I hear about this issue about reducing price, reducing cost. Now the Project SkyPower put a few recommendations out, and I'd love to hear a bit of your views on those different angles from maybe financial perspective, an airline off-taker perspective, maybe the capitalized market intermediary proposal. Is that something that would potentially address some of the risks that we've identified, would reduce potentially premium, would maybe satisfy some investors? I don't know who wants to start with their views. Erwin, I'm looking at you, but...
Yeah, no, happy to comment on. So, in my personal belief, in order to make things practically investable, we need also a carrot instead of only a stick. And I think that is, so the proposals made by Project SkyPower is to make it as efficient as possible for the kind of tax money, or even I think what is being suggested to use ETS money, right, to recycle it. So in that sense, it is kind of a zero cost game, if you like. Only you need to organize it properly, and I think that is probably the difficulty. Trying to how to kind of in the current setup of the European Commission, in the member states, and so on, how to get that organized. But if we recognize as kind of the European Commission that there is a role to play as an intermediate, because otherwise simply it will not happen, zero investments. I think that is something which really needs to be taken to the heart, and see, what we can do to work together to make this happen, at least temporarily. And we also kind of very often make the comparison with the renewable power, where there was a lot of kind of contract for difference solutions. In the end, it needs to be cheaper, right? That's the only way you get things done. Make it cheaper, and then it will, happen automatically. So, and that is, I think, where everybody should be focused on, because things won't just not happen automatically just to kind of put the stick in place.
I don't know, Rania or Alex, would that kind of market intermediary solve some of the off-take concerns?
I think the concept has quite a few benefits. First of all, let's all agree we're talking about what do we do in the meantime until we arrive to a functioning market. The day you have a functioning market with multiple suppliers, multiple technologies, multiple options in life, normal competition plays in, and then we don't have this kind of problem anymore. Right. So we are talking about the intermediary to launch a market, that step there. And there, I think it has a couple of benefits to it. One is that it gives me back my normal time frame, so I don't have to think about 10-year plans and opening up each other's books. There's someone in the middle who helps manage that risk, and we can all continue our lives more closely to what we're safe with and what our shareholders understand and all of that, and how we do our calculations as a company. That's one thing. The other thing it does is it makes good use of ETS funds. I think there's something like 190 billion euros from aviation starting from last year, if that's the right number in Destination 2050. Don't quote me, I would have to double check. So there's money there that is being paid in for all the right reasons and can be used to cover that risk. So be put to good use. Of course, we would need to align to the ETS scope, blah, blah, blah. So all of those framework conditions apply. But let's agree with the principle. The principle is there. So I think it provides the kind of market assurance that people around us need. As an airline, it's only one part of the solution. The other bit we care about a lot is the mechanisms that are there to cover the cost, the gap in the cost between conventional fuel and SAF or e-SAF, so SAF allowances under the EU to ETS, a very important mechanism that, again, can be improved so that it sort of matches the market reality of multi-year auctioning, because you enter into multi-year agreements. So then, again, your shareholders, your auditors see that the books are sort of balanced, those mechanisms. And then there's the element of flexibility. You also have to accept that from day one, we will not have SAF or e-SAF at every single airport. It's just not going to happen. And even if we tried, the price would not be the same. And that has competitive distortions depending on geography, because ultimately you're married to geography even when you fly. So those three parameters, I think, are part of a package that can help us really accelerate the SAF.
Catherine, would that help you?
Yeah, so it will help in the long term, but I think it's also important to highlight one of the other proposals from Project Sky Power, and that's the bridging mechanism, right? So as I mentioned earlier, we've now been ready to reach a financial investment or final investment decision as of last summer. And so in its solving for this offtake is the last piece, right? We understand that this long-term scheme will take time to build, and that bridging mechanism, that request, that's really to get started and absorb some of the really early mover risk, both on the producer side and the offtake side, because I want to reinforce that there are offtakers ready to stand in and help lift this space. So I don't want to lose sight that there is still another element there that's important.
A first mover risk.
That's right. But I want to highlight one of the comments that Aurenia just made that can't be emphasized enough. It is repurposing existing ETS funds from aviation to help build out this space, right? It is not asking for separate monies. And I want to highlight that especially because one of the existing instruments, I think for all the right reasons, that was supposed to be available for e-SAF projects was the Innovation Fund. And what we have found is that because these projects are so capital intensive versus the the carbon abatement it provides, it's very hard to compete with a carbon capture project. For example, because the capital intensive or the capital required for those type of projects is different, right? And so in some ways, aviation has been getting really penalized because it is a hard to abate sector, right? And so we're trying to highlight, hey, here's a way to make sure that we funnel money back to the sector that's investing in it.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to look to Eddie. What do you think about these proposals? Do you think that the Commission has an open ear to some of the proposals that the Project Sky Power put forward?
Absolutely, as always. I've been quite clear on the mandate. The mandate should stay, but indeed, we agree that there is something to be done to help the industry to bridge the gap between, I would say in terms of price, but let's say bridge the gaps between the airlines and the fuel supplier. And indeed, you make a very good point. The cost of fuels, in particular of e-fuels, is so that I would say a mechanism like the Innovation Funds with auctioning cannot work, because indeed there will be always projects for which the cost will be much lower, I would say, in terms of gain for the decarbonization. We need definitely to find another mechanism that we call, in general term, contract for difference, but then to be seen which form it will take. But okay, it's very nice to have the mechanism, but we need to have the funds. And there, indeed, the idea would be to look for revenues from ETS, but then it requires modification legislation so that indeed additional revenues from ETS would come from the member states to feed, I would say, the mechanism. I will not go into the details of the mechanism. I will leave that to my colleagues who will work following the adoption of the Clean Industrial Deal, then to make concrete proposal in the STIP. I guess you have seen the Clean Industrial Deal, probably. Then indeed there is no secret that there is a reference to the STIP on which we'll have to work and to make a proposal as soon as possible. I would say the only thing I would have as a remark when looking at the proposal which was made is that we have really to try, first of all, we need to get the revenues, but we have to make a system which is as simple as possible, which will not be for granted. That's my only remark when I see this mechanism with the intermediary. Why not? But it looks quite novel in terms of implementation.
No, thank you, Eddie. I think it's based on existing mechanisms, but maybe the public, let's say, involvement at the EU level is new in a sense. So indeed, that will require some further refining. I want to open up now for questions. We have a few, 10 to 20 minutes for questions. I obviously want to prioritize maybe first in the room, and obviously I'll look at you, Diane, for some questions online. Anyone in the room, questions to panelists? Otherwise, we can start online first. People are a bit shy here in Brussels, maybe online. Oh, yeah, we have one question here, Camille, in the front.
Hey, good afternoon. Oh, it's loud. My name is Jan. Very good to meet you all. Thanks for having me. The question I have is, let's assume Sky Power and other initiatives are not working out, but the mandates stay and the penalties will come. I'd like to hear a bit from BP and from the airlines. What is the conversation you're having right now about penalties, how to shoulder this, what to tell your customers, in particular between the two?
Can I ask where you're from, Dan?
I'm from Amsterdam based. My name is Jan Toschka.
And you work for?
I work for Safra. It's an e-fuel producer.
I guess maybe we take one or two other questions and then...
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Pedro Campos. I work for Smart Energy, also an e-SAF producer. My question is not really a question, it's a statement, because it's about dynamics. It's about the mandates are dynamic, and it's about renewables also being dynamic. So the more you add renewables to the table, the lower the cost of electricity becomes. So the more competitive e-SAF will become in the future. On the contrary, for bio-SAF, because apparently the event has become a bio-SAF event. On the contrary, because of competition for the bio feedstock, the more you add bio-SAF, the more you increase the price of the feedstock, and therefore the more you increase the price of the levelized cost of jet fuel that you produce at the very end. So for me, it's very clear. The dynamics show that e-SAF will be more competitive, and bio-SAF will be scarce and more costly. That's the first. The second would be that even with the carryover of the mandates that are not accomplished in 1 year, it's not the full mandate that is passed through, it's the gap. So the gap is not the double, as was suggested by in the meeting today. And this I would like to make clear, because it's not. It's indeed an incentive to boost the appetite for investment.
Thank you. A good case for e-SAF. So maybe I'll turn to Rania and Alex, maybe about the penalties. How are you preparing? What are you telling your shareholders?
I think the first conversations will probably be with customers around the penalties. So, and good, I'm sitting next to you, Rania. And thank you for your question, Jan. Look, this is a tricky area, because we want penalties that are ambitious, sufficiently high to drive supply of renewable fuels. What we are seeing with refuel is quite a novel construct. 2 times the price difference. Less of an issue with b-SAF if we look at the prices there, and if we look at supply-demand outlook for b-SAF, but quite a concern when it comes to e-SAF, of course. And that is really due to the open-ended kind of nature of that penalty design. Market participants are looking for a market price, and a penalty, a fixed, transparent penalty in the form of a buyout provides that transparency. So it's it gives market participants the possibility to anchor their discussions around that price, and it drives deployment and supply of those fuels, and we've seen that in road transport through more than a decade of similar mandates. So I think with the current open-ended liabilities, it creates a lot of uncertainty, and we're hearing that some airlines have already noticed the cost of the b-SAF mandate of 2% this year. So imagine what the cost to airlines will be in 2030 when the overall mandate reaches 6% and there's a 1.2% mandate of e-SAF. I think we can expect that the competitiveness issues probably don't go away by 2030. So one of the things that we kind of see on the horizon, a risk that we would like to avoid, is by not walking into the situation knowing that when the cost becomes disproportionate, then someone will complain, the industry will complain. We see this in other sectors, by the way, other sectors that T&E also is doing a lot of great work on. So I think we shouldn't walk into the situation knowing that there may be a huge issue around the cost when the penalties bite.
Mm. And would it be not easier to not have to pay the penalties?
Let me be very clear. We need those penalties. So we are not here advocating for a regime that has no penalties. Penalties need to be high, ambitious, and need to drive deployment and supply of renewable fuels. If there is an open-ended liability, it gets quite tricky. And in fact, T&E have done a very good report on the penalty exposure. We weren't involved in that report, but using publicly available information, I think you and some of your colleagues have calculated the penalty exposure of Air BP, and it's in the kind of $1 billion of it's in that kind of magnitude. So if you look at the size of a jet fuel supply business, then this is orders of magnitudes bigger than the size and value of a jet fuel supply business. So I think the question that a market participant or a jet fuel supplier would probably pose themselves is, are we in the right business?
So I was going to ask you, Alex, what would it take for BP to invest in an e-SAF project? I think you have many here in the room and online, but maybe looking at Diane, is there any questions online that we can take? Sure.
Yeah. One first to Alex. How can e-SAF producers effectively work with suppliers to deliver fuels at airports, given it's traditionally operated by fuel suppliers like yourself? And then one to the group. How much price increase can we expect passengers to absorb with e-SAF?
I'm not sure I got the kind of e-SAF supply question correctly, but I think it is about how existing supply chains can be used, pipelines can be used, and how, I think there's no difference between e-SAF and b-SAF here. We see a commingled kind of fuel supply system, and utilizing that commingled fuel supply system makes sense, whether we talk about jet fuel, whether we talk about b-SAF or e-SAF.
Maybe on the passenger price?
I was going to add on the infrastructure that some airlines are telling me that there is an issue of infrastructure in terms of some are some e-SAF or SAF manufacturers are new to the market, and therefore they don't necessarily have access to that infrastructure to actually blend the SAF or to deliver it to an airport. So that's something that I think we all need to be keeping an eye on and seeing if there's anything that needs to be done to correct it as we go through this first year of a mandate. And that question on passenger cost is exactly, I think, the question on everyone's lips. Fundamentally, to me, Rania, that is the question about how do we get to net zero and how do we manage that transition and keep Europe connected, keep people who need to fly having that option, keep it accessible. Because, they talk about the straw that breaks the camel's back, and at some point it will become too expensive for some people. And that then is a political decision that needs to be assumed. If it's the politics of the EU that flying should become too expensive for certain people, then we need to be upfront about that. That's not what I fight for as a free. I know that that's not what we all fight for together in the work we've done also with your predecessor, Eddie, and what we do in Destination 2050. But that's exactly it, that right now I think there is a sort of complacency that, okay, we can still tax a bit more, we can still add a bit here, we can still add a bit there. After a while, we won't. Sorry. And that has a real impact on people's lives. I repeat, I mean, my brother lives in Amsterdam. He could probably ride a bike to Brussels. He'd make it, I can't do that from Athens, okay? I can't. And someone who makes a decision to do business in Germany from the Mittelstand with someone else needs to get to that meeting once in a while. So this all adds to the cost of doing business in Europe, and it adds ultimately to the impact on connectivity and competitiveness of Europe. And that is the real question. When will the elasticity reach its limits? And when it does, it breaks, it pops. And rebuilding that is really hard to do, as we've seen from other sectors.
Eddie, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, perhaps very briefly on the penalties. For me, it's a bit a false debate because indeed the objective is to have e-SAF, the quantity in 2030. But indeed, there is a mechanism of penalties that's precisely to push all the stakeholders to meet the mandate. So I think that there we have to be very firm. But on the other hand, we have also, as a public authority, to take our responsibility, and fair enough, I would say, to note that indeed there is a market failure that, and we have to I would say, to fill the gap, if I may say so. On I would say the cost on passengers, I do not know what might be the impact. I would say that for sure you should not convince DG Move that aviation is very important for connectivity. It's not just for business, but to make sure that all regions of Europe remain connected. This being said, there will be a cost for passengers. Indeed, they will have also to pay part of the invoice to reduce the impact of the trip, of the activity. That's for sure. But where we will have to be very, very careful is the worldwide competition to make sure that the cost that will have to be borne by EU airlines in particular, because you know that the SAF is imposed for intra-EU flight and departing flight. I would say this does not create distortion of competition at worldwide level, and we are doing precisely now a study on this aspect, because that would be a detrimental effect, and that we should definitely avoid it.
Thank you, Eddie. I'm going to look. We have time for one or two last questions in the room. If there's anyone with any burning questions. Otherwise, I'll look online. Is there one? No, there's one here. Sorry.
Hi, Claire Harris from Power to X, which is a e-SAF developer. We're building a very large e-SAF project in Rotterdam. So the question is, if for each of the panelists, if you could have a magic wand and have one thing that would make e-SAF successful, what would it be?
You're stealing my questions. Great. No, perfect. A magic wand. What would appear? Alex, please.
To us, it's about building bridges towards full-scale e-SAF production. One of those bridges is around integrating green hydrogen with bio-SAF. So let's stop talking or thinking about e-SAF as one thing and bio-SAF as another thing. But we'd really like to see an incentive both in refuel and in the implementation of that to integrate green hydrogen production into b-SAF, as one step towards full-scale e-SAF production.
Rania?
Can I just say that I hate questions about one thing only, because it's rarely one thing only, and if Destination 2050 says anything, it's that there is no silver bullet in aviation. I'm sorry. So I've been sitting here thinking if I don't pick up my mic, she won't go for me next while I think. But I guess what I want is to someone to use ETS aviation revenue wisely to help underpin the cost gap and the risk, and help us get there more quickly. Because I compare this to a roller coaster ride. We're still going up that roller coaster, and at some point you sit at the top and then things just flow. And it's just really cranky and noisy and slow until you hit that moment. So that's what I hope, for this bit to be short.
Erwin?
Yeah, if I put this holistically, I would say, fossil kerosene tax it globally. I think that would solve everything. But obviously, we are living in not in that world. No, but I think, again, coming back to Project Sky Power, I think, to bring it really close to reality and what is possible. I think the double-sided auction mechanism to bridge basically the commitment, that the tenor of the commitments for taking off e-SAF, I think that is a crucial component to take this industry off. If not, I'm just, relatively pessimistic that this will kind of come off the ground, with the absence of, sufficient kind of economically viable business models. So, but that is just the humble view of a banker.
Is it the nature of a banker to be pessimistic, or should we?
No, not at all. Just being realistic.
Banker, realistic, pessimistic, maybe synonyms. But no, I'm kidding. Catherine, maybe from your side, what?
So, if you asked me last year what my wish would have been, is a common understanding. And I think, to be optimistic, one of the things that, if I look at this year, is, and especially in the last 6 months, there's really been a groundswell building of common understanding of what it takes to lift e-SAF, right? It was really lost before, and it really should be commended that we have a gathering like this with a lot of heads nodding, and participation online was strong. So that wish from last year, great. This year, very quite practical, risk-adjusted offtake. That's my wish.
Eddie, if you had a magic wand,
I see that commercial banks are quite pessimistic, so then I would perhaps turn to the promotional banks and the European Investment Bank, which are still very shy in this business. So I would like to see them supporting the EU mandates, because they have, particularly the European Investment Bank, as a kind of, I would say, not an obligation, but a duty to contribute to the promotion of EU policies. So I would like them to enter into project. So that's one. And for sure, then the rest will come with the step. So what I would like to see there is a bank, what I would call, we have a hydrogen bank, to have a sustainable bank for low and zero emission fuels.
Great. I'm looking if we have another question, but I think that was already quite a good conclusion to this panel. So I will basically say thank you to you all, because I think that was a good way to round up the discussions. From what I hear and from what I took away from some of the things that you've said, obviously reducing the green premium, I think it's positive that there's a lot of consensus on trying to build support for some of these tools that Project Sky Power put up. I think I feel quite optimistic to see some people and nodding and agreeing. I think there is a common understanding that there is a clear need for some support mechanism to kick off and kickstart the e-SAF industry, and I think that was clear and made clear by the Commissioner as well. And finally, I think I hope as well that we can continue to bridge, let's say, the SAF ecosystem together and bring them together to try and avoid those situations, Rania, as you say, trying to speak a different language, but try to make sure that we understand each other more and the e-SAF ecosystem as well. So on that note, I would like to first say thank you to the speakers, and please join me in thanking the speakers. Thank you. And maybe just to help us arrive to final destination, which is the cocktail reception, I would like to invite Evelyn Spulman from Systemic to maybe help us through concluding words, and we can all go back to our seats.
Thanks, Joe, for a very helpful and interactive panel. My name is Evelien Spulman. I work for Systemic. We're a system change company where we help the world to move towards a more net zero, nature positive, and resilient and more prosperous society. To paraphrase a little bit bluntly, right, where we started today with Apostolos Tzitzikostas and François Coiffon, we find ourselves at a critical junction today. As you will remember from the presentation, also from Trishla, from our SkyPower team, we're running out of time, right? If we want to achieve the mandate by 2030, we need to reach the first FIDs by the end of this year. And there can be a lot of, and I'll end positive, right? There can be a lot of positive, but there's only 9 months left in this year. And so time is running out. That's one. The second one is, we also see with the changing geopolitical environment around us that notions around energy resilience and also economic resilience are more top of mind and more important, right, quote unquote, for EU to get their act together. And also e-SAF here has a critical puzzle piece in that transition. Because first of all, right, it will help improve energy resilience because it would reduce reliance on import of fossil fuels and fossil kerosene, but it can also help to establish, right, a new, right, and stronger chemicals activities, right, and economic attribution here in the EU. So hence, right, there's plenty of reasons to help make this move forward and make this successful. As you have seen in the Project SkyPower presentation, we've brought together over now 75 companies and organizations from across the entire e-SAF value chain that spans incumbent, the major airlines, smaller airlines, big and incumbent producers, as well as the smaller producers that are coming up and finding their place, as well as the financiers and many others, all united around 3 things. The first one is they have actually aligned on what is needed to get to FID, right? And I'm quite helpful, right, that Catherine actually called it out, because you would think that it was clear, but it really wasn't clear a year ago. And now there's much more clarity that we really urgently need it on what is needed. Then the second part, which is not a small feat, if I may say so, that whole ecosystem now also unites around what is needed to achieve that, right? What do we need, right? What is needed? And those were the 5 asked from the Commission, right, and more on the policy side of things, but also increase, right, what's needed from, I'm going to say, all of you in this room. And the third one is a positive side, which is there is also in the engagement that we saw this morning, but we've also seen it over the past month, is that the industry is ready to move. And move also means is ready to engage to help, for instance, the Commission in orchestrating and defining what are now the real mechanisms behind the 5 bullets that would make a critical difference and get these plans to bankable projects. Then the final point to say there is, as Project SkyPower will continue our work program for 2025, we are ready, right, to also engage and keep engaging in this conversation with this group here. And with that, I would like to thank Transport and Environment for hosting this very timely event in a very helpful venue. Like to thank all of you, right, both for your participation now today, as well as what I hope, is continued engagement going forward. And with that, I invite you to go to the next tiny little stepping stone, which is the cocktail reception afterwards, to together discuss, how do we, make this happen? What are the next, small steps and big steps to go? Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. And just a last thing to say, thank you also for those joining online. And I hope that everyone can enjoy some cocktails. Unfortunately, not for those online, but for those physically present here. Thank you very much.